This is the English version of the review of New York 1927 by Alekhine. And strange, it was not until this year, 2011, this book was translated into the English language. If you compare with, for instance, New York 1924 or Nottingham 1936, which was also written by Alekhine, you could have bought them for a long time in the chess shops. But this is not the case with this book. So if you don't speak German, you have some difficulties. And this book, according to my opinion, is probably the best tournament book written by Alekhine. And of course, New York 1924 is a very good book, but I think this one is even better, despite it only contains 6 players and 60 games. First of all, you have a cross table in this book. Maybe you can see it. And Capablanca got the first place with 14.5 points out of 20. Alekhine 11.5. Nimzowitsch third place with 10.5. Wiedmer fourth place with 10 points. Spielmann fifth place with 8 points. And Marshall sixth place with 6 points. We also have some photographs where you can see how they look like. So, why is this such a good book? I'm going to show you some examples why I think it's a good book. And not only for me, I think it's a good book for most chess players. It doesn't matter your playing strength. You can always find something to learn in this book, that I can guarantee. So I'll start with a game between Marshall and Nimzowitsch, the French defense. This is a very timid variation played by Marshall, the exchange variation. Nimzowitsch liked very much to play against the double pawn complex. And now I want you to push the button and to think carefully what you would do if you had the black pieces here. According to Alekhine, the best move for Nimzowitsch is to play knight d8. It looks a bit passive, but still, black has a very safe and solid position. He can follow it up with castling on the king side. But Nimzowitsch played g5, which is a very aggressive move, so he's preparing a pawn storm on the enemy white king. And now he played castles on the queen's wing. And this is an interesting concept, according to Alekhine, because it has to do with the active king, how to play active with the king. And Alekhine mentions that this is a concept which you can find in some of Stein's games. And I will show you, after this example, a little bit more in detail what he meant by that. And also, Alekhine himself, when he played Capablanca in the World Championship match in Buenos Aires 1927, where he got the World Championship title, he also introduced an idea how to play actively with the king in the queen's gambit. I will also show you that later. Now I also want you to push the button, because I want you to find the strongest attacking continuation for white. Marshall did not play the strongest combination according to Alekhine. Marshall played Queen E2, and it's a very easy threat to discover, because the threat is Bishop A6. Nimswich answered with Rook DE8 to give the king an escape square on D8. So if white plays Bishop A6 anyway, black will just catch the bishop and follow it up with King D8. And later on the king can run to E7 and F7 after, for instance, Knight F5. So this is a completely harmless variation for black. Maybe some of you found the strongest combination here for white, which is Knight D2. The plan is very typical for this kind of structure. The knight wants to go to C5 via B3, and black can stop it with, for instance, Knight A5, and if white plays Knight B3 anyway, black can exchange the knight. But still, white will improve his pawn position with A2 takes B3, so his plan to play against the double pawn complex has failed. But white can also choose Queen C1 if he doesn't want to play Knight B3 immediately, with the idea to play the queen to A3. So white keeps his attacking chances here. Now I will show you which example Alekhine was thinking about regarding how to play actively with a white king. And we are going to look at a game from 1867 played in Dundee against Neumann. And it's an open game where we see this idea for the first time. Here we have an open game. So this is a Vienna game, but now we can almost call it a king's gambit. Now it's called the Steinitz gambit, and the idea is, after Queen H4 check, white has to move the king to E2, where it blocks the bishop on F1. And this looks very strange, of course, but Steinitz has an idea. He wants to play the knight to F3 and follow it up with King F2. So Neumann tries to stop it with D6, because after Knight F3 he can pin the knight. White can take back the gambit pawn, and Neumann took on F3 and forces the king up to F3. And here we have the example Alekhine probably was thinking about. The king defends two key squares, E4 and F4, and normally you can't play like this with the king early in the opening. It probably works in this position, but as a general rule it's very risky. So I will also show you how Alekhine played 60 years later, 1927, against Capablanca in Buenos Aires, 1927. He played that idea in two games, the 6th and the 16th match game. And we will have a look at the 16th match game. Alekhine was white in an orthodox queen's gambit. I'm not sure about the correct move order here, but we have the typical position for orthodox queen's gambit here. Here we have the famous exchange maneuver by Capablanca. Black managed to exchange one piece, and now black wants to exchange another piece, but you can avoid it with Alekhine's move Knight E4. after the queen's exchange, it's very logical to take back with the king, because the king can also prepare for centralization in the endgame. If we compare with the black king, it will take 2 moves to reach the central square on e7. Later in the game, Alekhine improved his position with e4 and king e3. And here you can see the idea that white controls important key squares in the center, particularly the pawns on d4 and e4. So that is one thing I like with the book, that he's very good to explain strategical ideas through the history. And he uses a lot of text, more than variations. If you want to improve in chess, it's very important to read verbal annotations rather than variations without any meaning. And in this book, you have a lot of text, particularly if you compare with other books. In this book, we also have a very good model game how to play the London system. It's between Alekhine and Spielmann. And this is an old idea which you can try in your own games, but I will not discuss it now, probably later. I will also mention something Alekhine writes about after the third move between Capablanca and Marshall. Today we normally play d5, but it's very interesting to hear what Alekhine has to say about this move. Hardly the best, because with this stiffening of the pawn position in the center, an all too great choice between different plausible plans of development is left to the opponent. More flexible is 3c4, with good prospects of getting sovereignty over the center squares. I really like this comment, because today we just play this move without thinking. I mean, we get some space, we control important squares on c6 and e6. But actually it will improve the different plans for black. I mean, he can for instance play in the Volga manner with b5. He can even play a6 here. And of course moves like d6 or e6, like in the Benoni, or g6, like in the King's Indian, are playable here. The advantage with this move is you keep options. For instance, you can still move the pawn to d5 if you want to in the future. Black can of course take on d4, and we have a kind of Sicilian pawn structure. But if the tension is keeping here, white can always play g3 or e3 or knight c3 to keep the tension. So I like this annotation a lot, because you don't find it in modern books. And I think it's very important to learn the history to really understand the modern contemporary chess. Another example is between the game Wiedmer-Marschall. Marshall played this very unusual move, knight e4, so you can almost call it the Marshall variation, because he played it also against Alekhine. Here I suggest you push the button to think about what you think is the best move here. The best move according to Alekhine is to play e3, and Wiedmer played this move, and The first player who had this idea in mind was Pillsbury, a very famous player who won the Hastings tournament in 1895. And the idea is that white wants black to exchange on f4 despite the double pawn. But the idea is that white will get a half-open e5. So it's easy to put pressure on the pawn on e6 here, after f3, for instance, in the future, when the knight on e4 has to move. White also wins time for development. I mean, if white takes on d6, it will only benefit black's development. So this is a useful idea to remember. Now black didn't play the best move. He should have played knight d7, but he played queen e7, and now white has a very strong move. So I suggest you think a couple of minutes what you would like to play here. Dietmar played the strongest move, c5. In this position, black doesn't like to exchange on f4, but in practice he has to, because after bishop c7 it will be difficult to develop his pieces on the queen's wing. And this is what white wants. So now he can focus on the weak point in black's position. White has to defend the pawn on f4, but this is according to white's plan, because white wants to play the pawn to f3, and if black can't exchange on c3, he will have some trouble when he moves the knight back. This is also a good position for you to really think about, so I suggest you push the button and think at least 3 minutes. Dietmar played a very strange and artificial move here, because he played queen c1. The simplest move is just to play according to the plan, knight e5, followed by f3. And the queen is even trapped, so black has already had to think about maybe to move that knight so he get the square on f6, and then white can focus on the pawn on e6. But he didn't play this natural move. Very strange. He played this move. And focus on the queen's wing. Rook a3. Very interesting idea. Dietmar is planning to move the rook to the king's wing, h3. So that's the reason he moves the back. It moves the bishop back. And this is a very strong move with pressure on h2. So white can't play this now because black has a winning move. Can you see that? 2 minutes. I hope you pushed the button, because now I show you the winning move for black, which is knight e3, exclamation mark. If black takes on g4, white will take on e2 and win the piece. White is forced to play h3, but now the rook can't counter h3 anymore. Threats to take on e6 with check, so black moves the king to h8. Black is preparing to play g5 in the future. very dangerous threat now, knight f7 mate. So black has to take the knight. And this is the last question, I'll tell you. Which move is the best? Do you recapture with a pawn or a queen? So I suggest you push the bottom and think a few minutes about this. It's very important to do the right thing here. Wiedemann didn't do the right thing. He took with a d pawn. Of course he gets a square for the knight, but the problem is that the pawn blocks the e5, so it's not so easy to put pressure on e6 anymore. So the best move would have been to play queen takes e5, because then he keeps the rooks on the 5, and he can also in the future perhaps maneuver the knight to e5. So now it's much easier for white to combine the threat on e6 with a b4, b5 break on the queen's wing. So this is a book I strongly recommend. It's in the same class as, for instance, Bronstein's Neuhausen Zürich, 1953. So I think this is one of the world's best tournament books.